Hi, Rob here. Squeaky chair. Hi, Rob here. I put together a little video production. I'm trying to explain what the 5 steps to a better Canada are that I see. This was a result of the examination and research and looking at the state of the world. Specifically, it came to me by watching the Occupy movement and realizing that all of these people, all with different problems, most of their problems stemmed from 5 fundamental basic problems, which, if addressed, would then fix all the rest. Essentially, what I saw was that their problems were almost like the symptoms of a disease, a social disease, and I examined deeper to try to find what was the actual disease itself instead of the symptoms. I would like to share with you these 5 steps to a better Canada. And I hope you enjoy my efforts. The first problem that I see that we need to do is, in fact, to grow up. I don't mean to be insulting, and I don't mean to sound arrogant or condescending. But when you look at it, we are allowing ourselves to be divided based on the silliest reasons. Whether it be color of skin or the paradigm you believe in. We're all essentially human beings in a common law jurisdictions. We are stardust rendered incarnate on a rock in space. On a fundamental level, we need to stop acting like children and stop looking to the government as the fixers of the problem. We have to stop believing in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, and the Crown. We have to seize the responsibility for what has happened, for what is, and for what we build. In short, we have to grow up. The good thing is, I think it's happening anyways. I look around, I see it's happening. There is a growing sense of consciousness, a growing sense of global unity, and I see great good coming, and I see people, in fact, growing up and refusing to be treated like children anymore by the government. That's what one of the major problems they're facing is. The second problem, which became quite apparent, and when you look at it, it's quite obvious, is the way in which we govern ourselves. It is, in fact, archaic. The idea that we have to elect someone every 4 years to represent us, that we would further divide ourselves every 4 years based upon what is essentially arbitrary lines. It creates a level of division which makes working together next to impossible. It's almost adversarial in nature. And who trusts these people now anymore anyways? The parliamentary form of government is hundreds of years old. When it was created and designed, they still believe in kings having divine right. They believed in witches. Their greatest form of communication was the messenger pigeon. We now have the internet. We now have technological abilities unknown in the history of man. And we can very easily create a system of direct democracy where we are entitled to vote on individual issues as they arise. We can raise those issues, we can freely discuss them, and we can decide. We don't need elected representatives anymore. I could see a need for elected heads of office, and we could elect them to do a job, but on a fundamental level, we do not need to give up our power to these people whom we know have agendas that benefit corporations at our expense. There's no need for any more Harpers. The third big problem, which is quite apparent to those who aren't involved in it, is in fact the problem with the courts. These courts, we all know power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And without trying to denigrate all of the good people in there who do seek to serve justice, when you have courts sending out agents to manufacture conflict which can only be settled in those courts, it's not justice. For there to be justice, there must be truth. And as soon as fictions are heard, then fictions rule the day, truth is gone, and there is no justice. Fictions in court. Is in fact the third problem. We need courts within which people can be heard, equality can be embraced and recognized and protected, and from that position, people held accountable for their actions, regardless of what a body of words they never made says. We have too many so-called crimes in this country where no victim is involved, and it's only a matter of refusing to do what we're told. Disobeying the government, it should not in itself be a crime if there is no harm, no damage, no fraud in your contracts. We need courts that serve people and not corporations. For the moment you have a court that claims that corporations are persons and people are persons as well and all persons are equal, what you end up with are people who are shackled to the level that corporations are. Corporations being created by the government has a great deal of control over them. People not being created by the government should not be denied rights available only to human beings because they are seen as persons equal to corporations. The fourth problem which I see is the fact that our peace officers are not just peace officers, they are also policy enforcement officers, and they are engaging in violent activities which would otherwise be clearly criminal. They know they're engaging in criminal activities, for they are removing identifying badges and numbers, and they are hiding their face with masks. Calling them gas masks doesn't change the fact that they were the ones wearing the gas masks, they were the ones in control of the gas, and no gas was used. We need true peace officers. Who serve the public peace first, and who serve policy enforcement and revenue collection second. We fundamentally need those. The final problem that I see, of course, and which is quite obvious to everyone, is, of course, the money supply. Seems there's never enough money, and the money that is in circulation is usually put into circulation with debt attached to it, with interest attached. And it must be repaid back with more than what was put in. Mathematically, the machine doesn't work. You end up giving a small number of people the power to control and collapse your economy in such a manner that they eventually own the whole thing. The big problem with the money supply is that we ask it, just like our peace officers are asked to fulfill two functions, be a peace officer and a policy enforcement officer, and that creates conflict. So too does our money supply create conflict when we ask it to fulfill two different functions. When we ask it to be a store of wealth as well as a medium of exchange, you end up with people hoarding it and trying to limit our ability to exchange. If our ability to exchange is a function of the amount of money put into circulation by a certain group of people, then they have the power to limit our exchange, and we all suffer. It would be better if our ability to the amount of money in circulation should be a function of our exchanges. If we were to do something like that, then we would always be free to exchange, and there would still be money in circulation for those who wish to store it for wealth. Those are the 5 problems I see. We need to grow up. We're dealing with an archaic form of government. We allow fictions in our courts. Our peace officers are acting as policy enforcement officers primarily, and the money supply is dictated by a very small few, always with interest attached. These are the fundamental problems, and I think this is the disease. And if we fix this, much of the other problems, as you'll see, would evaporate. Creating a better Canada isn't really all that difficult. The first step, all we have to do is just care a little bit more about our country, about each other. That's all. It starts off very easily, and it should be in line with the positive nature of your own spirit. All we have to do is care, and that's the first step. Second step is going to be a little bit more difficult. As you recall, the problem is our archaic form of government. I believe the answer is a People's Congress. A form of direct democracy relying upon the internet and the communication of technology we have available to us, used to ensure that we do not have to elect anyone to act as our representatives, and we can decide issues ourselves. We can raise them, we can discuss them, we can determine them, and then we can let our government agents and employees know what our intent and our will is. It can be one that requires consent to join, recognizes the limits of the benefits and control that it has over everyone. And bear in mind, you don't have to build this. All you have to do is get out of the way of the people who are, recognizing that once built, even though you might not like it now, your kids might love it. Certainly it would grant us, the people of Canada, the power to control the government. I believe that a People's Congress should be able to decide any issue, whether it be fracking, whether it be the criminalization of various substances, and we should be able to determine those things. I don't think it would be all that difficult to establish either. I believe that there are certain forums already online when direct democracy is taking hold. And if any politician doesn't like it, ask them what problem they have with democracy. And if a little enough to elect them is a good thing, then why wouldn't enough to not need to elect anyone not also be a good thing? The third problem, as you'll recall, is fictions in courts. And the way to fix this is to convene new courts, the people's courts. These should be operated much like the existing ones are now, the only difference being that equality is recognized and fictions have no voice. No corporations, no fictional entities, no state, no crowns, no nothing except people who can take the stand, held accountable for what they do. And if you are engaging in actions that harm your fellow man, damage their property, use fraud or mischief in their in your contracts, then they would have a place where they can go and bring action against you, knowing that you won't be allowed to hide behind fictional constructs that you claim give you limited liability. I think people's courts where equality reigns supreme and truth is served by denying fictions will bring us the justice that we expect from a proper court. I think this is necessary to a properly functioning society, and without it, the corporations end up owning us all. Now, the fourth problem, as you'll recall, is the fact that we ask too much of our peace officers and police officers. Giving them the status of peace officer and then the power of a policy enforcement officer, well, you can only wear one hat at a time. The remedy for that, I believe, is for the people of the country to hire each other as peace officers. I am not trying to create another armed group of people who are going to go out. It's certainly not a vigilante police force as described by the Justice Roque. What it is people hiring each other to preserve and maintain the public peace. It is those people making an oath to preserve and maintain the peace and to act with peaceful intent and manners within their community. The secondary function of it, and bear in mind, we're not bringing arms to bear against the police officers. We will be armed with nothing more than notebooks and pens and video cameras, but we will record their actions with the protection the status of peace officer affords us. This will mean that they will not be able to charge us with obstruction of justice for disobeying a peace officer when they tell us to stop filming them. It means they will not be able to bring violence to bear against us with impunity, and it means when we testify in court, our testimony will have the weight that a peace officer's status affords. It will create more peaceful communities, more responsible people, and it should make the job of the police easier when they know that they are dealing with someone who is sworn to preserve and maintain the peace. Their fear of violence should be diminished considerably. The secondary function of the Canadian Common Corps of Peace Officers will be to enforce the rulings of the people's courts. They will be officers of those courts, and they will do essentially for the community and for the country what the police presently do for the existing de facto courts. Now, the final problem, as you'll recall, is the money supply, and the fact that we allow it to be put into circulation with interest and demands attached to it, and there's never enough put into circulation to meet the demands. We could take all the money that we owe to these bankers, pay them, and there would still be the interest left over. There'd be no money in circulation, and they have brought nothing to the table except for the chits we need to engage in trade and exchange. Luckily, there is remedy presently available in the existing statutes that recognizes our right to the wealth of this country. And the way we do that, I call it the Association of Canadian Consumer Purchasers, ACCP, and its goal is to help people exercise their right to essentially spend money into circulation for consumer goods and consumer purchases. Now, there are limits to what you can do with it, but when you look at what you can do with it, I'm sure you will see the benefit that it would bring to not only yourselves, but your community, your country, and how it will actually address the problems with the banks now having a monopoly on the issuance of money and them only making it available through what is as best could be described as deceptive and fraudulent means. They often engage in what appears to be misappropriation of financial securities. And I think we can generate a new source of wealth that does not require the banks and which they cannot control and does not allow them to dictate our exchanges and our trades. I'm sure many will likely see now why we are so heavily maligned in the mainstream press and now by the justices and by other peoples and powers. There are people who are in control of the parliament. There are people who are in control of the courts. There are people who are in control of the police officers and in control of the money supply. And these people do not like us sharing the ideas we do and holding the perspectives which we hold. I think if you look at this, though, you will see that all we are talking about is more compassion, more democracy, more justice, more peace, and more access to our wealth. We're not looking for anything harmful. We're not looking to harm anyone. And we believe that we have a right to engage in these actions and to build a new and better way with which we govern ourselves. I believe that these 5 steps will address many of the problems that we have, from the division within our populace to a archaic governmental system which is easily hijacked and perverted by corporations. It will provide justice, true justice, in the courts when there are no fictions there. We can have peace officers and avoid a repeat of what we saw at the G20 summit from our police officers, and we can have access to our wealth. And I don't see why anyone would be against this unless they happen to be one of the people involved in that and enjoy the level of power that it gives them over their fellow man. I believe this is our country, and we have the right, we have the duty, we have the power to examine the issues, realize what the problems are, and fix those problems. And when the problems is the government, when the problem is the courts, when the problem is the police officers, when the problem is our money supply, it's time to fix it and clean house. And we should take as an example the actions of the people in Iceland. We can, in fact, create and convene a proper People's Congress within which all people have an equal say, equal vote. We can convene. Once there, we can use that to craft a constitution which empowers people's courts, within which no fictions and everyone's equal. And we can create a people's force of peace officers to preserve and maintain the peace and enforce the orders of our courts. And we can use the consumer purchase process to access the wealth of this country for needed things. Now you understand why they try to denigrate us. We're attacking their structures. And we're doing it by ignoring theirs and trying to build better.